Hello and welcome to the Indiana Farmers Market Community Practices June webinar, Weather Emergencies at Farmers Markets. I am Christina Ferroli, the Grants Program Coordinator for the Indiana Cooperative Development Center. Today we have a fabulous panel of speakers joining us, Larry Spilker, Amanda Bailey Mosiman, and Sharon Pattee. Larry Spilker represents Campbell Risk Management and has been the Director of National Farmers Market Insurance Programs for the past 13 years. He is considered by many to be the nation's foremost expert on farmers market and vendor insurance management. Larry conducts insurance and risk management seminars for farmers market associations from coast to coast. He loves his own backyard farm and is passionate about the farmers market community. Sharon Pattee began her career in public health at the Wabash County Health Department and served as a retail food safety inspection officer in Grant, Boone, and Delaware counties before joining the Indiana Department of Health. Sharon became the state wholesale trainer at IDOH, but returned to her retail roots as retail food specialist with the Food Protection Division in 2016. In January, Sharon became Indiana's first state trainer and standardizations officer for the Food Protection Division. Sharon graduated from Vincennes University. She currently seeks adventure in her hometown of LaFontaine in Wabash County as a foster failure with her special needs American Bulldog Daisy in Sassy Calico Scout. Her favorite pastimes include writing true crime, gardening, and jewelry riding with Miss Daisy. Amanda Bailey Mosiman is the A&R Extension Educator in Warwick County, and she is the Extension Disaster Education Network Program Support. I want to remind everyone to please remain muted during the webinar. However, we want this webinar to be participatory. If you have questions, either raise your hand and we will call on you, or please drop your question in the chat. Thank you. And we're going to start off with Amanda, followed by Larry, and then Sharon.
Thanks so much, Christina. I appreciate it. And thank everyone for being here today. So my point of this panel, as I work with the Eden Network, the Extension Disaster Education Network, this is a national network of the land grant institutions that put together and pool resources for disasters. And really our focus is on prevention and mitigation of disasters. Obviously, we have response resources, but our main point is prevention. So this is right up our alley. So my main talking points are just going to be about the importance of having a plan and make sure that plan is written down. When these decisions need to be made, it needs to be really, really clear who is making the decision and when the decision needs to be made. And when you're dealing with weather, there is that unpredictable element, but if you have a plan in place, that 10 to 15 minutes that may occur while you're having a conversation with a group or trying to get group consensus could really impact, the timing of getting people to safety. So whatever your plan, just make sure it includes knowing who's going to make a decision and at what time we're going to make a decision. And that's the best thing. As far as writing a plan, you do not have to be an expert in emergency management to write a solid emergency plan. You have to be the knowledge of your space and who you're responsible for. And I think for market managers or vendors, that's pretty self-explanatory. You can get help writing a plan if you have a local COAD, which is the communities active in disaster, county emergency services. Every county has an emergency service. Some cities go ahead and have their own. So reach out to them. Those local emergency planning councils, extension educators. We're on all 92 counties. We are part of our county emergency plans. So hopefully we can help draft farmers markets. And then I have a handout and I've already dropped that in the chat, the severe weather plan overview. And so what that is that actually was something that a colleague and I put together a couple of years ago with a grant as we tried to help extension services understand, we call it clustered youth storms and preparedness, because in extension, we're often dealing with youth groups. And so we have volunteers that are taking 4-Hers to different places, and we need to we need to make sure that we have plans at our fairgrounds, or maybe emergency plans at the churches where we're meeting, or the community buildings, and things like that. So that's really what the purpose of that was. But I think it lends itself very easily to farmers markets. Get informed, prepare a disaster plan, get a disaster kit if you need it, exercise that plan. And it's a several page document that kind of outlines a plan overview and what you might include and a few key terms. So once you have that plan, get a plan down. Once you have that plan, it's really, really important to review that plan on an annual basis. So some little things change very, very quickly, whether it's, who's at the market to make a decision. Maybe there's a different way we set up the market. Maybe we're in a new location. Maybe there's different contact people, but that plan needs to be reviewed annually, because you don't want to have a plan that's sat on the shelf for a few years, and when you need to activate that plan, it's out of date. So it's about all I'm going to say on plans. We can get into specific questions a little later, but the other big thing I want to hit is really knowing your weather terms. And I know we all think we know our weather terms, but continually, year after year, research shows that there's a lot of confusion behind National Weather Service and the Storm Prediction Center's use of, what's a severe thunderstorm warning, what's a watch, heat advisories, outlooks, what the difference are between all of those. So outlooks are usually issued on a daily basis unless special circumstances exist. Those come out of the Storm Prediction Center and your local National Weather Service. I think Indiana is served by 3 National Weather Services: Indianapolis, Louisville, and Paducah down here in the Southwest. We actually get ours out of Kentucky. So those outlooks come up daily. Advisories, those are really the special conditions, and most common that farmers markets are probably going to be using is if heat advisories. So in those days of high heat where you could see heat stress with your vendors and your people, that would be a call to pay attention to that. Watches are the first alert. That means there's just a likelihood that conditions are favorable. So that means kind of your little weather aware beacons need to be up a little bit. And when you really get into that warning status, that means action. That means prepare now. So when you get to the warning status, that means it's been observed, it's on its way, and you need to be taking action. I know all of us have several weather apps on our phone, but those have shown research, depending on the app, can have 10 to 25 minutes depending on how fast they update their data, the settings on your phone. Really, you need to be using a weather radio, and that weather radio needs to be programmed correctly. And I know a lot of times weather radios, we get some complaints because it'll go off, and we have large counties in Indiana. But if you understand why National Weather Service does their predictions based on polygons, right? When you see the severe weather coming, they draw that polygon and they draw it out, and they say it's going to be in Boonville at 12:15, it's going to be in Tennyson at 12:20. And that's if any county within that forecast polygon, that triggers the weather alert radios. So that's why you may not be seeing severe weather, but your weather radio is going off. But that is the best, most up-to-date way to get your information, because that's going to be coming across first. I understand, certain apps, they may be going off at the same time a weather alert's going off, but we've just found in research with extension, certain apps on your phone service, they can't be relied on all the time, because in true large severe emergencies, one of the first things that's going to get clogged up is that cellular service. And so weather radios are programmed to be a little different. You can work with your local EMA. There's several really great YouTube videos on how to do weather radios, but you need to make sure they're programmed correctly, and they have the county codes for what you're in. They're called SAME codes. I always like to program SAME codes, especially for the ones that I'm using in public spaces where I'm in charge of public safety. I actually put in the counties to the east of me, because that's where most of our severe weather comes. And I'm knowing what's happening in Gibson County and Vanderburgh County next to me before it's coming to Warwick. So I will set off all 3 of those alarms if I have to, because I want the extra time to make the decision. So I have some resources. I have some links to kind of go over those things. I know there's a bunch of questions in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead, let Larry and Sharon go on with theirs, and we can answer those questions at the end.
Larry, you're muted.
Well, that makes it difficult for anybody here. So thank you very much. My name is Larry Spilker. I'm with Campbell Risk Management. We've been working primarily in the farmers market space with insurance and risk management for the last 13 years. We do this nationally and work with farmers markets specifically from coast to coast. And over the years, the question of, weather preparedness and so forth has come up many times. So as was previously mentioned, having a plan in place is paramount. Having the executive decision made on who's going to make the decision and the determination, so it's not a debate at the time that it occurs, where you have to have people get together and half of them agree, well, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. I don't think it's going to come. I do think it's going to come. It needs to be narrowed down, made a decision that somebody is going to make that decision, and there's always a staff member with that authority on site and available to make that decision. So have a backup person as well. If that person that would be normally making those decisions is sick or is unavailable or whatever the case is, that you have another person that is their backup, that knows what the plan is and has that executive decision making authority on what they're going to, what decision is going to be made. And everyone should follow, of course, then that directive, whatever that is determined to be. So a lot of things go into making the plan is determinant on your location, on where you're at, on what resources are available to you. So if you have a farmer's market operation and there are nearby indoor shelters that are available to you or for your vendors, your staff, and for your patrons to go to in the event of a storm, that's your best alternative is to have those shelters, have a plan in place, speak with the people that have those buildings, those businesses, those whatever it is inside those structures that they have agreed to allow you in the event that there's inclement weather, that this would be where your people and it would be able to go, and that it's okay for them to do that. If you made an announcement, everybody needs to move to X building and wait out the storm. So if that's available to you, take that. If that's not available to you, having an exit plan to have people go back to their vehicles and wait in their vehicles until the storm has passed. If you have lightning, that sort of thing. That's another alternative when you don't have a shelter in place. West Lafayette Farmers Market has emergency procedures in place. You can look them up online. They have an Appendix A in their program for their emergency procedures and how they operate in West Lafayette. So for an example of what this market has chosen to do, they have a green flag that flies at the farmer's market for everything in normal operating conditions and everything's good. A yellow for a possible threat of storms within 100 miles. Orange is if it gets within 50, and red is, hey, we've got to take action here. Imminent severe storms within 20 miles of our farmer's market location. Communicating that is also a key to be able to communicate not only to your patrons, but to communicate to your vendors and other staff members of the farmers market. Depending on your size, you could be very small, which is hollering distance from across your farmers market from one side to the other, where you could just yell very loud and everyone there could hear you. Or you may be in a situation to where screaming at the top of your lungs doesn't work. So having another way of communicating, we've got an issue, here's the plant. So some farmers markets will use radios, and they will have either staff members or vendors assigned to that have agreed to this. They will have a radio at their station that they keep on, that's on the frequency that the farmers market manager can communicate then to the four corners of the market via radio in the event that there's an issue, and then they can then communicate that to the other vendors. And an air horn those things are very, very loud, and you can have a system of maybe 3 blasts of an air horn means tear down your station and take shelter, or whatever your plan is. 2 air horn blasts mean there's a warning, be prepared, there's a potential issue. 3 air horn blasts means hey, we've got an imminent threat, we need to take shelter immediately. Could communicate even an active shooter situation. I mean, whatever that emergency is that arises, you need to be able to communicate that quickly and effectively, whether that be by radio or by air horn or by yelling. That needs to be priority in your plan, is communicating that we've got a threat and the action plan is now taking place. So monitor the weather forecast as was mentioned before. Having that contingency plan in place, be it an indoor venue or everybody goes to their vehicles. If you're looking at high wind type situations, tearing down your station, the canopies should be weighed down anyway. These winds can come out of nowhere. And having the corners of these canopies weighed down is important. But we've seen, no matter how much you weigh down a tent, there's always that one wind that hits it just the right way and picks that thing up and blows it across, causing damage to somebody's car or unfortunately injuring people in the process. So if you can catch that before it happens, doing what you can do, what's considered reasonably necessary to ensure the public safety by having those corners weighed down, that goes a long way towards dealing with situations where people are injured by it. But so anyway, when concerns are out there, if you have a tornado warning alert, that sort of thing, obviously you just tear down, shut down, or if there isn't time, you just abandon ship and take shelter. If you can catch it within enough period of time where it's reasonably considered safe to be able to have the time to tear down, do so. If not, then just do an abandoned ship type program at that point. So have a place for people to, if you can, where they can get shade, they can cool off. If there's a tent area there, if we've got high heat indexes, have cold water available. It's always a good idea I've heard so many times where there's been a slip and fall, somebody's sprained their ankle, whatever the case is, and it takes 15-20 minutes to rummage up a bag full of ice, to put on that injury to help that person. So if you have somebody that's having heat exhaustion or potentially heat stroke, heat exhaustion occurs when your body temperature reaches internal body temperature reaches 103 and you can't regulate it down. Heat stroke is 104, but you need to be able to bring that body temperature down with ice, cool water, shade, that sort of thing. So have those kinds of places, if you can, have those places available, have the resources available to help cool somebody off if needed, when you run into high heat type issues where somebody just becomes overwhelmed by the heat out there. So there's several places out there that have resources available to you for emergency plans. The Farmers Market Coalition, National Farmers Market Coalition has put together weather plans, weather resources, emergency plans, and so forth. A resource center for those kinds of things to help you put that kind of program in place. So the Michigan Farmers Market Association and the Washington Farmers Market Association. I like the West Lafayette Farmers Market emergency plans and procedures that they've kind of put together. But look at those resources that are out there from folks that have been pooling those kinds of resources together, and kind of make it your own. I mean, again, it's very difficult to have a meeting like this and say, we can't give you a cut and dry, this is what your plan should be, because everybody's circumstances is different. So you may not have a shelter that people can go to. Those kinds of variables are there. What do your exits look like? Is there one exit? Are there two exits? Is it open all the way around? You can exit everywhere. If you go out to the Fisher's Farmers Market, I mean, it's one great big circle. You can pretty much exit anywhere you want to in that area. So anyhow, you kind of do have to make it your own based on what your circumstance is. Just make sure everybody's on the same page. It's not a bad idea as well to, when you have your vendor meetings, your annual vendor meetings, to go over that plan with the vendors. Your market manager and staff is going to be your first point of decision making and communication, and then that'll go to the vendors. The vendors can communicate that to their customers and personnel that's there, or the patrons that are there, and kind of allow them to be able to spread that communication of, hey, we got to shut down, please go to your cars, that sort of thing. You can use that network of communication through them as well. So that's pretty much what I've got here. If I'm happy to answer questions best I can, though. I'll pass it off to the next.
Thank you, Larry. And next we have Sharon.
Hey, Christina, thank you for inviting me today, and thanks for that nice introduction. I think next time I need to get Daisy and we'll do a mobile webinar on the golf cart, just to show that food inspectors are human. So I think sometimes people are just like, oh, it's the food inspector, and it's like, hey, we're human too. So Daisy and I may join you guys. We both love farmers markets. So with that being said, I really like some of the points Larry brought up, and I'm going to bring up those too for those extreme. I just want to literally tie into his comment about tarps, because so many of our farmers markets use tarps for both shade and protection from the elements. And with that being said, if you tie onto a table or your cooler, both may go flying and it can blow into other vendors. Your cooler may now become a moving target that has attacked other people or hit people, and you've lost the food out of the cooler. So I wanted, before I go any further, to remind everybody of that. Like, one time we tied a tarp to a cistern lid, and even that concrete cistern lid lifted off. So you just never know. And the same without looking at general environmental health, the same with outhouses or those bouncy castles, any of that sort of thing. An extreme wind event can take off and become a hazard itself. So also going along with high winds, anytime you have, especially coming across a parking lot or a field, any of that debris as it's picked up is now litter and debris that can attach itself to even something as simple as a cupcake. If you have food that's uncovered or laying out on a table, no matter how beautiful it looks, if it's unshielded or unprotected, now you've got leaf debris, you've lost all your beautiful baked items. And on top of it, like, it does become to a point that you're just like, what's the use of being here if now I've got the maple leaf whirly gigs and all my stuff? So having that tarp is important. Just make sure it's tied down really good. Also with high winds, if you have a fire hazard, I would mention that any of your stands that have fryers should have K extinguishers. So I don't know how our farmers markets are with fire extinguishers, if that's a requirement or not. I'm guessing that's not, but that's always a resource that you would have if you, depending on the market, if you have any of the food booths that have fryers with a food permit, they should have a K extinguisher available for use in case of emergency. So just something to point out there. Another thing is if you do have a storm event, I would suggest not being the food vendor at the bottom of the hill. We've had situations that where the water comes rushing down the slope and you now are the victim of a tsunami of rainwater. If you've set it next to the storm drain, now you are the relief for all that storm water and debris that's now coming towards you. So just make sure, if possible, that you're not the one sitting on top of or next to that storm drain. You can't dump your water down anyway. So it just makes sense that you stay away from that and, if possible, stay upslope. And sometimes it's hard in those really large markets, but that's just a suggestion. Something to think about with the high heat is the fact that, like, you got to keep that food hot, you got to keep it cold. That's one of those reasons that home-based vendors are not allowed to do potentially hazardous food, because we can't require them to keep it hot or keep it cold. So for those food vendors that are permitted, or a non-for-profit, or just a suggestion for anybody that is trying to keep food hot or cold, make sure that, if possible, that the food is frozen before you come. So any of those freezer meats, anything that you could bring frozen, because the other thing is your consumer is going to buy that food and then walk around the market to enjoy the market. And seeing, next thing you know, you've got lukewarm food that's dripping everywhere. Having a frozen product, if that's possible, only benefits you and your consumer. And I had somebody ask one time, could they sell fish, a live fish, and could they fillet that fish at the market? And my thing's like, well, I don't want to be the vendor sitting next to the smelly fish. So it's not that things can't be done sometimes, but thinking about, is this palatable? Is this something that, like, is going to benefit the whole market? For live shrimp, Christina and I discussed this yesterday. Live shrimp are allowed to be done, and I've seen it done at the farmer's market, but they have to be a living animal, and therefore they have to be sold on ice. If the event is too hot to keep that ice going and up and like ice, it's maybe not the best event to bring the live shrimp, because they may not be live long. And I tell my inspectors, don't wear a stethoscope. I don't know when that time of death is. I don't want to know. However, we don't want them by the end of the farmer's market to die a natural death and it not be a pleasant experience for the shrimp vendor. So keeping that food hot or cold, just remember, if you are serving a hot food, even though it's a really hot day, if you've got strong gusts of wind, there's a good chance that that food may be cooling off really fast. For example, a hot dog or a hamburger, if you're putting on a tray or a platter to the side without a heat lamp, there's a good chance that it may not be able to keep temperature. So good idea to keep that food thermometer. You would have, we know those serve safe people out there, you would know that safely you could keep that if you and your inspector have came to agreement. I'm using time instead of temperature. However, if you don't have that agreement, it has to stay above 135 once it's taken off the grill. You may think, oh, it feels like 135 out here, but the sun's not a heat lamp, and I just wouldn't recommend that. So do keep a food thermometer close by. If you got 4 to 6 hours worth of cold food, I would recommend, once again, it come frozen, or if not, an ice chest cooler be used. Have those ice packs fully frozen before you come to the market. If you are selling something that could be used as ice, for example, popsicles, using that as part of the actual coolant during the market. With heat and humidity, that ice cooler is going to start to drain. And I would suggest just making sure that, because you don't want your food like sitting there floating and bobbing around, make sure that you open the drain, but if possible, not flood your neighbor. So if you can get it going in a direction that won't impact others, that's the best way to do it. The same with like, unless people really want to splash through this water, this mystery water coming from out from under your table, I would recommend just like draining it the other way, or taking it off to the side and draining it periodically so that you don't have food floating and bobbing around. If you're using the poultry or rabbit exemption, we all know that those products have to be frozen when they come to the market. The same with freezer meat, if you have the freezer meat permit. So once again, if you got layers and layers of frozen meat and rabbit, and that's a great way to pack other things in there too. It's going to keep cold. I'm trying to think. Make sure if you're using ice that it's a potable ice, if it's going to be drank. And if you're using ice as a coolant and reaching down into that, make sure it's not part of the drink. So drinking ice separate than the actual coolant ice. And I remind people, like, if you got liquids or you use that cooler to put your Thanksgiving turkey in and it never got cleaned, that salmonella hopefully isn't still growing in that cooler, but make sure it's a clean and sanitary cooler before you use it. And get your ice from a good source, Home City or any source that tests their ice and their water before it comes. I remind people that ice is a food, and once you add ice to anything, it is now a food, even though it was just a powdered lemonade. Once you add the ice, it could be contaminated. Something else I want to suggest, and this was just, Christina and I were talking yesterday, it was such a good point. Due to dehydration of your consumers and the participants that come to your farmer's market, you may want to offer free water. You can sell the water too, but I know one of the things we always look forward to as a child at our county fair was one of the political parties would offer Dixie cups full of lemonade. And, you'd look forward to going into the, barn to get your free lemonade. It was a great way to rehydrate and keep cool. That doesn't need a food permit. Like if you're just doing powdered lemonade, and it's, especially if it's a non-for-profit, great way to lure people into your booth and to rehydrate your people too. The same with other non-potentially hazardous foods. A non-for-profit could do a popsicle. It doesn't have any cream in it, like you're just freezing some Kool-Aid. What a great way to lure people in, not need a food permit, and give things out. We also discussed, and this comes from me doing animal rescue, Daisy and I love going to farmers markets. And so making sure if that concrete or that asphalt is too hot for your bare feet, it's too hot for your pup's bare feet. So just keeping that in mind before we bring pets to the farmers market. However, as a food inspector, nobody's going to regulate your water bowls. If you want to set out a water bowl, that's free water. In fact, I've seen people put free on the water bowls. If you want to have a pet-friendly market, making sure that those pets or those critters that come to your farmer's market are getting rehydrated too. Some examples there of what we can do. And I also want to share before I go, one of my favorite suggestions for this year came out of Northern Indiana. I always love it when somebody suggests a new product that will lure people into their farmer's market. And I got a call like, do I need to regulate this? This was a local inspector. I'm like, don't regulate that, but that's ingenious. And the product was a puppuccino. So somebody wanted to sell puppuccinos. So the Indiana Office of the State Chemist regulates dog food. However, this person was going to go buy ice cream cones and use whipped cream and sell them for $1 each to all the puppies coming through. That's a great way to rehydrate an animal or cool an animal down. If I was a kid, I'd want a puppuccino too. So just think like if it was done for people, you'd have to look at some other items like maybe a hand sink. But those are ways to cool down and bring people and lure people into your market that are also food safe. So I just wanted to share those ideas. And Christina, once again, thank you for inviting the Indiana Department of Health to provide some information for you. It's always fun.
Thank you, Sharon.
can I jump in real quick again?
Yes.
I apologize, Amanda may be able to speak to this better than myself, but I would be remiss if I didn't jump back to it. I didn't say anything about lightning and thunder. Okay, so that's one question that comes up a lot, and I can't believe it. Just I didn't mention it before, but so. Lightning can travel, according to the National Weather Service, lightning can travel 10 to 12 miles, and it can actually travel farther than the sound of the thunder will actually travel. So that's where you kind of get the unlikely scenario of the, out of the blue, the bolt out of the blue. The storm wasn't even around, and there was a lightning bolt. So some markets use a 30-30 rule. Basically, the 30-30 rule is if you hear thunder and you can count to 30, or you see lightning and you can count to 30 before you hear the thunder, it's close enough to where you're going to need to take some action. The second 30 in the 30-30 rule is to wait 30 minutes after you hear the last clap of thunder before you resume operations. So at what point do you consider it, a temporary thing? Is it safe to bring people back into the market and reopen? Some markets look at, okay, if it's gone on for an hour and we're looking at radar and it looks like it's going to persist for another 2 hours, we're just going to make the call and call it a day. I mean, those are kind of things that you want to take in mind. But that question does come up a lot. What if I hear thunder? What if I hear lightning? How does that relate to my emergency plan? If you see lightning or hear thunder, then that you can use like that 30-30 rule and take it from there. But that should be part of your plan. If you can hear thunder, chances are there is a potential that there could be a lightning strike. So, okay, that's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. I'm trying to scroll through. I don't see any questions. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask our panel, our guest panel? Don't be shy. Lots of great tips and resources have been shared in the chat. So please make sure you can download the resources Amanda posted. I will download the chat and share it. Wow, it's a quiet group today. Everyone did a great job. Lots of good tips and pointers. Again, check out the resources in the chat. And I know Larry mentioned some really good resources from the Farmers Market Coalition and then Michigan Association. Yeah, Farmers Market, and then Washington State Farmers Market Association. They all have some really good pointers for weather emergencies. And again, Sharon shared really good pointers. Things to keep in mind for your customers, for your vendors. Just keeping things cold, getting to the market with cold products and making sure you maintain them as cold. It was about the best info that I was able to glean offline, which Sharon shared with us. So great tips. All right. Well, if there's I don't see any hands raised, so I think we're good. Thank you all for attending this webinar. It is being recorded and it will be shared through the INFMCP website under trainings and webinars. So hope everyone has a great afternoon and have a great 4th of July. Well, it's coming up next week. So happy 4th of July to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.